Reverend Fred Nile.
I rise tonight after the successful unanimous adoption by the New South Wales Legislative Council of the motion that recognise the Assyrian and Greek genocides. In remembering these events, we do not seek to apportion blame. This is a matter of history, and history must neither be erased nor forgotten. We must remember and speak the truth. New South Wales recently visited by the world-renowned scholar Professor Tanner Akam, who I personally met, and he had previously been from Turkey, and he said, quote, "We must create a global awareness of genocides and their prevention. Genocide denial and the struggle against it are part of global democracy and human rights. Recognition is an issue relevant to all humanity," end of quote. Anzacs, men of New South Wales, were eyewitnesses of the genocides. Anzacs rescued survivors of the massacres and deportations across the Ottoman Empire between 1915 and 1918. People of our great state donated generously to save the lives of those who had reached the sanctuary in Greece, French Syria, British Iraq and British Palestine. The story of the Armenian, Assyrian and Greek genocides are part of the Australian story and deserve their rightful place in that narrative. The genocides of the indigenous people of the Ottoman Empire that took place during World War I and its aftermath are a historical event. The victims of this criminal act were the indigenous peoples of the Ottoman Empire, Greeks, Armenians and Assyrians. Many members of this chamber have substantial numbers of Australian Greeks and Australian Armenian people in their communities. Hundreds of thousands of them have made their homes in New South Wales over the past 2 centuries. All these groups suffered at the hands of the government of the Ottoman Empire. As early as 1910, plans were formulated and published for the elimination of the indigenous Christians of the Ottoman Empire, part of the government's efforts to homogenise its population. Those populations, documents, and millions more like them are available today, demonstrating the intention of the Ottoman government of the time. That was a determination on the part of the Ottoman politicians to eliminate non-Turkish identities. With the outbreak of war, their plans began to be implemented. When the Anzacs landed on the Gallipoli Peninsula, there were Greek people living there, tilling the soil and fishing the waters. There were also Turkish tax collectors, police and soldiers. The non-Turks are the people who were deported. These are the people who were massacred during World War I and after. International reaction was immediate to what the British Secretary of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, labelled as an administrative holocaust. Relief committees sprang up all over the world. A joint Allied declaration issued on the 24th of May 1915 stated, quote, "In view of these new crimes of Turkey against humanity and civilisation, the Allied governments announced publicly that they will hold personally responsible all members of the Ottoman government and those of their agents who are implicated in such massacres." When the Anzacs left the Gallipoli Peninsula, they left behind hundreds of prisoners of war, men such as the Sydney-born Private Ashton, 11th Battalion AIF, and Burke-born Petty Officer Cecil Arthur Bray, HMAS AE2 RAN. The Anzac prisoners of war went through a series of prisoner of war camps, typically being marched from one to another on bread and water rations in bitter cold or blistering heat. While Ashton, Bray and many of their comrades were eventually released, more than 60 other Anzac prisoners perished from a combination of exposure, disease, malnutrition and exhaustion. A small number of Anzacs became rescuers, saving the lives of those who had survived the massacres and deportation. Most famous of these were the men of the Dunster Force. Australian officers in this unit, including Captains A.H. Cooper, Andrew Judge and Stanley Savage, have left a legacy of written and photographic records of their rescue of the some 40,000 Assyrians and Armenians in the mountains of the north-west Iran and eastern Iraq in the summer of 1918. In response to the needs of the destitute survivors scattered across the Near East, committees of Armenian Relief Fund and Save the Children Fund emerged in Sydney and Melbourne between 1915 and 19. Among the leading lights of this movement were the Sydney Lord Mayor, Jonathan Smith, and many other leading citizens. It was a truly national effort with New South Wales at its heart. I am indebted to the research of Dr. Dominus and Dr. Victor Badman, Director of the Australian Institute of Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Their pioneer efforts have provided the evidence of this genocide. The truth of the genocide, the truth of what happened to the Armenian, Assyrian, Greek people, it is in the records of our own Australian servicemen. We should remember and learn from such dark chapters in human history. In the same spirit, we can secure recognition of a genocide which is very real and very heartfelt by the Assyrian community, by the Australian Greek community and by the Australian Armenian community in Australia today.
Time.
Lest we forget.
The Honourable Linda Bolts.
Thank you, Mr Acting President.